Hi, thank you so much for joining me today. Today we're going to be talking about pedaling at the piano, specifically the right pedal, or what we call the damper pedal or the sustain pedal. We're going to take a look at what it is, how it works, things to listen for while we're playing with pedal, and then we'll wrap up with some exercises that will help you improve your pedaling skills. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So let's take a look at what the right pedal does exactly. It's easiest to see on a grand piano. So you have an angle from there and from above. Hopefully you can see everything that I'm going to be trying to show you here. So what the right pedal does is it controls these black things. That there's one for every single key except for the uppermost notes. But for most of the keys, every single note has its own damper. And it's called a damper because it dampens the sound. When we play a note, the damper for the note is raised while we keep the key pressed, but as soon as we let go of the key, the damper goes back down. And that dampens our sound, that ends our sound. We don't hear that note anymore. But what the right pedal does is it lifts all of the dampers. So if you look carefully, you can see them moving there. And when all of them are up, then when we play a note, if we let go of the key, the note keeps sounding because the damper hasn't been released back onto the strings to stop the sound. When we let go of the pedal, the sound stops. And that's mechanically what the pedal does. It holds the dampers away from the strings so that we hear our notes, and the notes keep ringing until we let go of the pedal. It works for single tones like I did before, but it also works for entire chords. I played a C major chord in both hands, and it just keeps ringing until I release the pedal, which puts the dampers back onto the strings. That's what it does on a mechanical level, but what does that mean for us musically? On the one hand, it creates a bit of a warmer sound. Let's hear the same chord without pedal and with pedal. It sounds a bit warmer because when we have the pedal down, we have resonance from every single string. Even if you have an acoustic piano at home, not an electric piano, then it won't work. But if you have an acoustic piano and you actually talk into the strings, you can also hear the resonance. We don't actually have to play the tones. We can hear it coming back to us. And if you want to sing, then it's even more evident. Oh. It's quite subtle, but that's the type of resonance that we create when we use the pedal. So really fast for the beginners out there, or if you're just not entirely sure how to pedal, of course we play the pedal with our feet, and what you want to keep an eye out for is that you're playing more or less with the tips of your toes. You don't have to feel like you have to grab on with the edge of your tippy toe either, but somewhere in this range of your foot is good. You don't want to be playing from the pedal from the ball of your foot. That's you don't have as much control that way, and it's also much less comfortable. And the other thing is to make sure that your heel stays on the ground. It's not leg day. We don't need to be pumping the pedal with our entire leg. The heel stays on the ground. We control the pedal with our toes, and that's all we need to know. Some pianos do tend to have a little bit higher pedals, and then it is a bit uncomfortable to be playing with pedal. If that's the case for you, then what you can do is you can either set a rug or a couple of layers of rugs underneath your foot so that it brings your heel up higher so that you don't have to work as hard to reach the pedal. Or in extreme cases, I've even used books. I've set a layer of books underneath my feet so that it wasn't too uncomfortable to be pedaling over a long period of time. So that's what the pedal does, but how do we know when to use it? Well, when we're first starting out, that's always going to be very clearly marked in our music. Sometimes we'll see something that tells us that we just use the pedal throughout the entire piece. Sometimes it will be a long, thin line with these little arrows that stick up, and every time the arrow comes up, that means we lift our foot and then we put our foot back down. It can also be marked with a word PED with a dot, then that stands for pedal. And then there will be little stars that tell us when to release it. That's also an option. But at some point, once we're more advanced and once we understand more about music and harmony and how the pedal works, we can also start to use the pedal on our own with our own intuition, more or less. And composers, for the most part, assumed we would do this. Chopin, for example, and Beethoven, they seldom put very explicit markings in their music, but they assumed that we would be playing with pedal and that we would know how to do that. So now that we've discussed the mechanics of the pedal and how it works, let's take a look at some examples from the classical repertoire that are quite common among pianists and popular among piano students. And I just want to use each one to discuss something that we can always be listening for when we're practicing improving our pedaling skills. Because at the end of the day, of course, the body part that we use to play the pedal is our foot, but the most important body pedal for basically everything we do at the piano is our ear. We want to always be really actively listening, and that is really what's going to take our pedaling to the next level. So our first example is a prelude in C major from Johann Sebastian Bach from the first book of his Well-Tempered Clavier. So from this piece, we can learn that we need to be changing the pedals always with our harmonies. This piece is quite accessible even for beginning pianists, just because the patterns are quite clear and it doesn't move around so much. Of course, for beginners, it's a challenge, but it's somehow within reach. And what we want to listen to here is this piece. In every single measure, we have one pattern that we have 2 times, and each pattern is just a broken chord, or an arpeggio as we call them. So the piece starts with a C major chord, and then we switch to a D minor 7. It goes to G major 7, or dominant 7. And back to C major. Now, there will be some who would argue that Bach didn't write for piano, he didn't have a pedal, so we shouldn't be using pedal when we play his music. Those of you who feel that way are entitled to that opinion. I am of the opinion that we are playing on a modern instrument, we have a pedal, and we can use that to our advantage and use it to create a warmer, rounder sound. So how I usually play this piece, and how, if you go back and watch it again, you can watch my foot more carefully and notice that when I play, I change every single time the pattern repeats. Even though it's the same chord, I think it provides a bit of clarity that we don't necessarily have if we just pedal all the way through. But that said, if you're a beginner and you're not so comfortable with changing the pedal, there's also no problem with keeping it down for the entire measure, because it's not going to be too blurry. It's not going to run too many things together. I will show you just as an example so that you can see. So here's one time with changing just once per measure. And once again, changing every time the pattern appears. Now you may notice that I change the pedal very quickly. This is what we call syncopated pedaling, that when the new chord starts, we very quickly raise the pedal and then it very quickly goes back down. And we'll have an exercise to help you practice this technique at the end of the video, so don't worry about that for now, but it is important for creating this seamless sort of sound that doesn't break the phrasing of our music. Our next piece is Für Elise from Beethoven, and I will play the opening section and then we'll talk about the takeaway that we can have from this piece that we should always be listening for. So very similar to the Bach prelude that we looked at a moment ago, this piece also tends to have just one harmony per measure. But sometimes the melody gets in the way of our pedaling. So for example, if we play this opening with pedal, it sounds very fuzzy and muddy and it's just too much information. It's really ugly, unfortunately. And that's because we have these half steps, neighboring tones, and neighboring tones don't tend to work well with the pedal just because it's this, in the end it sounds a bit like playing the notes at the same time. It's not very pretty. So then we need to be really careful to release the pedal when we have this pattern, even though the harmonies in between all flow together. Release. And so on. Our third example for today is the first movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. And here we're coming back to what we mentioned in Bach about clarity. Here again, we have an example where the harmonies fit together. It doesn't sound wrong if we don't change the pedal in these few spots that I'm going to show you, but it does take away from our melody. The melody fits with the chords. It's not like the melody is too much information on its own. It's not neighboring tones. It's not biting into the sounds. It's not this dissonance sort of thing that's going on. But if we don't change the pedal, we don't have the kind of clarity in the melody that we want to have. So let's take a look at the introduction of this piece. So here I have two very specific spots that I want to look at. Once in measure 8 and once in measure 13. And what happens here is I'll start 2 measures beforehand, so the pickup to bar 6. We have, the melody is rolling along. We have 2 times the same harmony. But to me, it sounds much cleaner if instead of playing it with one pedal, we change. So I'll show you that once more. And here it is one time without the pedal change so that you can hear the difference. Here, it doesn't make such a big difference. I do think it's the way to go from good to wow, that's so beautiful. I mean, it's these little details. We have the cake, and these kinds of details are the frosting on the cake. It just makes it so special. But to an average listener, it's also not going to be, they're not going to be sitting there saying, well, I believe you should have changed the pedal on the second half of the second beat of measure 8. It's not that type of error. But in measure 13, where we will take a look now, I really think it makes a very big difference in the sound, because instead of going upwards, the melody is going down. And if we don't change the pedal, the second melody note that fits with the same harmony gets a little bit buried. And we want to be able to hear it and really hear it on its own, that it stands out. It is the star for that moment. So we'll start in the pickup to measure 11, and the spot that we're listening for is in measure 13. Our fourth and final example for today is from Chopin's smaller A minor waltz, and the part that we're listening for comes in the middle, so I'll start there. If you're following along with the score, it is in the change that we're looking at is between measure 32 and 33. And here we have something very special that's happening, that we actually have exactly the same chord and the melody continues with exactly the same note. But we have a change of character, and we can also use the pedal as an expressive tool. It's not just there to support the melody and to support the harmony, but it's also a musical tool in its own right. And it can be quite essential in changing character and changing mood. And I think this is a really nice example of that. So we'll play through the section once. So here, we don't really know where we're going. We have the same theme that was at the beginning of the piece, and we have this moment of anticipation. We have a B7 chord and then an E7 chord, and we wonder, okay, but what's coming now? And all that happens is the sun comes out. We have this anticipation, and then it kind of resolves, and it's just the resolution is, the sun is here. And it's a really beautiful moment. And because we need this new sound for the new section and for the new key, it's really important that we change the pedal. If we don't, we just blow through this change of character. And I personally, in this section, I like to drop back. And I think that that's a nice change of color. If we don't change the pedal here, then there's too much sound hanging from the chord before, and we don't have this change of color. We don't have this new subtlety coming in. So if we don't change the pedal, it sounds like this. It sounds okay, but I personally like the subtlety of the other version, that we just take this moment, we stay there hanging, and then the clouds break and the sun comes out. things that we can always be listening for. Changes of harmony, spots where the melody doesn't really jive with the pedal and we need to be staying really on top of things and keeping it clean. Spots where we want to change the pedal for clarity. Even though everything works harmonically and it works melodically, we want to make sure that our melody is really singing through. Or where we want to have a change of color or a change of character, or a change of mood, or whatever that may be. The tool can also be, the pedal can also be an important tool for that. So I promised some exercises to help us practice these techniques. Of course, the best way is just to sit down with your pieces and practice slowly and really concentrate and really listening. Okay, am I keeping everything clean? Am I really making the changes when I want to? But sometimes it's also easier said than done. And sometimes it's nice to take a step back and just to have a technical exercise that helps us kind of work through the mechanics when we don't need to be worrying about musical details or what kind of notes we're playing and things like that. So one thing we can do is just play, I'm going to play a C major scale. I'm going to play it just with one finger, and we're going to work on using the pedal to help us play more legato, to help us connect things. And we're going to do that I'm just going to use my second finger, and every time when we play a note, the foot is going to come up. I'm going to go very slowly a few times so that you can really see, and I'm going to exaggerate with my foot. You don't need to bring your foot all the way up from the pedal. The toes can really just stay there. I'm going to be exaggerating so that you can see more carefully or more easily. So we're going to start on middle C. My foot is up. I've played the note, pedal down. Now I'm going to switch to D, and in the moment when I play the D, my foot is going to come up. Foot goes back down. Then I move with the second finger to E, and the same thing. In the moment when I depress the key, I'm going to lift the pedal. Back down, move, back down, move, up, back down, and so on. It's important to do this with one finger because then you can't cheat. If you try just playing the C major scale with the normal fingering, then it can also be that you're releasing the pedal in between and not actually using the pedal to create these connections. Because it could also be that you play the note, you depress the pedal, but then you pick the pedal up when you pick up your finger. That's a very common thing. We don't actually want to for this type of pedaling, for the syncopated pedaling that I mentioned before, much earlier in the video, for syncopated pedaling, we don't move our feet and our fingers at the same time. They kind of work. The best example that I can think of is a pulley system. When the finger goes down, it's like you're lifting something with a pulley system, that it's pulling it up and then it can go back down afterwards. But we really need this kind of syncopated, that's why it's called syncopated pedaling. It's in contradiction somehow. So what we don't want is to play note with the pedal up, note with the pedal up, note with the pedal. That is something that sometimes we do want to do, but that's also not so complicated. This is the much more difficult exercise of playing, move, change, down, change, change. And so just work on that and really check yourself and really be listening very carefully. Now, you can also by all means do this with and I would suggest doing this also with the left hand. And then you can also do it with the hands together so that you're practicing this kind of coordination. So we play both hands, change, change, and so on. And once you get the hang of that, you can do the same thing by just playing chords. And you can do what we call diatonic chords, where you just play all of the triads throughout the C major scale. that would be the easiest option for getting started, just because you don't have to think about anything else. It's just really this idea of coordinating the hand and the fingers with the foot and working all of that out. So it's the same thing as before, but this time with the entire triad. So change, 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 change. And you hear how there are no gaps in between my chords, and nothing is overlapping either. We're not ending up with and then cleaning it. What we want is to really have it a clean change every single time. And then again, you do this with your left hand. And once that's easy, you can do the hands parallel. And once that becomes simpler, you can speed up the tempo, and you can think up your own variations also. But these 4 basic exercises, so right hand, left hand, hands together with single notes, and then right hand chords, left hand chords, hands together. And that will help you develop this coordination. And if you practice this just like you practice your scales, like you should practice your scales, at the beginning or end or in the middle, but daily as part of your practice ritual, you'll notice that it becomes much simpler. And of course, it's more difficult to apply this in our repertoire, but if you've practiced the principles in isolation, it becomes much easier when we put it into the context of our music. So I hope that these tips have been helpful. I hope that you've learned something with me today. And if you have any questions, please leave a comment below or send me an email at robin@pianowithrobin.com. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and share it with a friend if you think it could be useful for someone. Thank you so much for joining me, and until next time, happy practicing.